Okay, thank you. Welcome to Bangkok Community Radio. So we're going to do a little Q&A for 20 minutes with Vinca before her exhibition starting tonight. So Vinca, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Vinca Peterson, and I'm a multidisciplinary artist working primarily with photography. I have an archive going back to when I was 7 years old, and I have an exhibition opening tonight, and that's based around my book No System, which was documenting my life as a traveller putting on illegal raves all over Britain and Europe.
Nice. And we were saying before you came on about you being born in East Asia, in Seoul. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that upbringing and maybe how some of that kind of impacted maybe your experience and maybe your experience kind of writing the book a little bit later?
Yeah, well, I always wanted to come back over this way because I was born in Seoul in 1973, and I left when I was a toddler, a little baby, and it's been in my kind of psyche ever since. So I've always imagined this place and decided to finally travel back to Seoul. And in the same way that I met Shige from Super RAF, I basically looked through all my emails from over the last sort of 20 years of anyone that had bought my book, No System, and that was from Seoul. And I met some people via email, and I said, have you got an interesting cultural space I can come and introduce the book to? And I did the same with Bangkok, and that's how I met Shige online.
So the book was published a few years ago, and it's been republished. Is that correct? Maybe you could talk through the republication process and maybe what the motivation was for that.
Yes. So I've published 3 books. The original No System was actually published in 2000, but the idea was always that it was an affordable book that anyone that was into free party culture could get hold of, and then it sold out, and for many years people were writing to me saying, we really want your book, but it's like on Amazon for like £300, it's far too expensive. So I decided to reprint it was it 2019 maybe? And the publisher offered to reprint it, but it was going to be a long it was going to take too long, so I did it via crowdfunding, which was it was great. And so the book is now available again to people, which is the main idea. I don't like the idea of an exclusive photography book. I like one that everyone can have. So.
Nice. And what was the difference in reception of the 2 publication processes? Or I guess 20 years apart nearly, so quite different moments in time, I guess.
Yeah, it's a strange thing about No System is that it always seems to appeal, and it always appeals to every generation of young people or people that seek some kind of mild rebellion and freedom in their lives. So actually, it was quite similar, the reception, because for some reason that book doesn't grow old. And for the same reason, when I republished it exactly as the original was, because it kind of felt like it was beyond me. It had its own life with all the people that loved it and people that, were interested in it. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Sounds great. And so I guess maybe you could talk through just the experience of making the book originally and what, I guess maybe some of the experiences at the time and also, maybe, or any moments that stood out to you, I suppose.
This could be a long answer. Settle down, take a seat. So I went to a lot of raves in London and in the countryside, but the police started to crack down on them. So we ended up buying camper vans and trucks and putting our sound systems, the big speakers and all the equipment to put on these raves. in the backs of trucks, and we headed out to Europe where there was a lot more space and the police didn't know what was going on yet. And I spent maybe 4 or 5 years on the road and was always photographing what I did. And back then, there weren't smartphones, so if you took photographs, the only way to share them would be like if someone was physically standing next to you, you could show them. So a lot of the people I photographed, there weren't really many people photographing the scene because it was an underground scene and people didn't like to be photographed that much. But because I lived with the people, they didn't mind. So after a while, I wanted to make some copies of the photos for all the people I'd photographed. So I went back to London, and a friend of mine who was a fashion photographer, Corinne Day, was making a book, and she said, "Why don't you meet the same guy that I'm making a book with, and that would be the best way to get these pictures out there because you can make lots of books." And I was like, no way, I can't make a book out of this scene. It's really private and underground. And in the end, I took a mock-up of the book around Europe and showed it to all the people that were either in it or involved. I had to physically do that because I couldn't do it online. We didn't have, smartphones. And everyone reacted the same way. They were all like, no, you can't print like that. You can't publish those photos. And then they would kind of go, actually, if you give me one book, that's fine. So in the end, I worked with a publisher, Steidl, and he let me have complete editorial control. And also we kept the price of the book down to £10. So that was my idea. It had to be £10 or less so everyone could afford to buy one.
Nice. And since then, so you talked about some other books, a part of that you've also published as part of that kind of piece of work. Was there a difference between the first piece of work that you published and then was it easier the second time, I suppose? And did you feel like your kind of creative process changed a little bit with the second or the third kind of piece?
I think because all 3 books, well, No System was photographs of my current life at the time, but the next book I published is called Future Fantasy, and that was in 2017. So, but it was still a look back in time, and I actually worked with Ben Freeman of Ditto Press, and I gave him kind of freedom to look through the archive, and we would decide what book we wanted to make, and he actually chose a point in time before No System. So when I was still just leaving school and just discovering clubbing and kind of electronic music and the first summer of love, and so we made a book about that called Future Fantasy, which is an artistic collaboration as well, because he made a lot of the old rave flyers and photos into collages that are in the book. So I'm always much more interested in collaborating with other people and seeing what they come up with. And then I did another book called Deuce and a Quarter, which is the street name for a big American car, which was based on 4 women on a road trip across Texas. Again, it was in 1999 that the work was from there then. But I'm working on a new book now, which is coming out either towards the end of this year or next year, which is current work, so not the archival rave work.
And can you talk any more about the upcoming book, or is that top secret?
Well, so I've been a mum for the last 20 years and focusing on that. But when my son was turning 18 and I was about to turn 50, and actually on a personal level I had ended a long-term relationship, and I suddenly found myself in one of those positions where you can kind of suddenly do whatever you want, or it felt like a big moment of release and freedom. So I thought, what can I do in my 50s that maybe I don't want to do in my 60s or 70s? So I thought something physical. And then I thought about the space I lived in and how I'd never quite lived in the space I'd wanted to live in. So on the invite of some friends that live on the Isle of Skye in Scotland in the Inner Hebrides, I went, and to cut a long story short, I've spent the last 2 years building a house with kind of natural building materials. And to do that, I worked similarly to the way I helped put on illegal raves. I invited other people to come and help me, and we all learnt together. So again, a big kind of community, kind of creative exercise, which ended up with me having a beautiful and natural home to live in, and lots of visitors now coming back to see it and stay.
Nice. That's cool. And so the photography in the book, can you talk to us about maybe the kind of cameras or anything kind of, what do you prefer to shoot on? And also maybe specifically, has that changed over time, especially if you're, with your recent project? Are you on the same piece of equipment that you were 20, 30 years ago, or are those things, have they moved on? Are we in a digital world?
In some ways. I never... My father used to photograph us as children, and I found it really difficult and excruciating, and he would always be sitting us very formally for these portraits and telling us not to look like this and not to sit like that, and it was so uncomfortable that I knew I didn't want to take photographs in that way. But he was an artist and photographer, so it was in me. So I just use Instamatic cameras with kind of, and I find that doesn't interrupt the moment as much as a kind of big technical piece of equipment. But I did, for no system, I even used throwaway cameras, disposable cameras, any camera. It was more about the fact that it was small and could fit in my pocket. And my photography's always really been about being in interesting situations and taking photographs. I don't create the situations or go out particularly looking for them. It's really just what I'm doing in my life. So I kind of have to live an interesting life. But I was told about an amazing camera, which is small and inobtrusive, called a Contax T2. And I bought my first one in second-hand in New York in the early 90s. And I have just treated myself to my second one, second-hand from a shop in Tokyo. It was a little bit more this time. It's kind of battered, but it looks great. And I'm just going to see if you can hear the sound of it opening, which I love. There we go. And I'll take a picture as well. Oh no, it's not taking. Oh well, there we go. That's the sound of it opening and closing anyway. Nice. The light's too low in here. But and what's amazing about a Contax is it's got an incredible lens. So I would always say to anyone, don't worry too much about getting, a particularly fancy camera. Just always concentrate on the lens. And no, I haven't gone digital. And I do shoots and take photographs on film, which is very expensive. But it helps me edit. So I don't like having infinite amounts of possibility. I work better if I've got less, I have to edit before I even take the photo because they're expensive to take and develop and print. But I do use my phone a bit.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's important, I suppose, at some points. But do you I think just looking at some of the photos in that you've kind of published previously, there's some very beautiful framing of some of the shots. Are there things that you think about when you're taking a shot, or are you really focused on the moment, I suppose? Do you look at a situation, are there certain moments or scenarios that you think, need my camera for that?
Yeah, the I don't know if it's a sad thing or a brilliant thing. I always say that all the best photos are not taken because you're completely involved in whatever the thing is. But I did always have a kind of compulsion to record something that I thought was amazing or interesting or beautiful. So I don't overthink it. In fact, at one point I tried to be a bit clever, and I thought, well, I should take maybe more than one photograph of the thing I'm looking at. And then I realized that always the first one out of the 2 or 3 I took was the one. So I've stopped doing that now. I just take it kind of instinctively. But I would say that one thing I learned and I use, which is important even with a kind of Instamatic camera, is kind of looking at the framing. So I did learn to kind of frame a person that I was photographing maybe against more of a blank background, or to kneel down so that you could photograph them against the sky or something like that. So trying to empty the background of the shot of some of the chaos. But then some of my favourite photographs are ones where there's total chaos everywhere. So yeah.
And I was kind of just wanting to touch back on the kind of like the transition of reception, and especially in the context of like the amount of photos that exist now and the amount of content online. Do you feel, and I suppose especially with, now theoretically I can ask an AI to shoot me a shot of a rave somewhere. Do you find that there's a position that people take that they're more interested in kind of the concept of kind of real photography, especially historical photography, looking back in the kind of maybe the 90s or early noughties, and I guess maybe just like what are your thoughts on like maybe where we're going within some of those moments, because it's a complicated world, I guess.
I mean, yes, there are a lot of images out there, but I think it's kind of what's important to me anyway is what I choose to show, and what is the message, or what impact do I want to have on the world, and that's a personal thing that'll be different for everyone. But for me, for example, producing a photography book that is just pictures that I like for myself, in a kind of maybe slightly egotistical way, is not interesting. I would always like have some reason that I want to put something out into the world. So I think, I don't really work with single images as much as groups of images, and images that are taking the audience somewhere or suggesting something, or absolutely ideally is when I put lots of pictures on the wall, which I often do, very sort of what you might call generous photography shows with lots of images on the walls. What I love is actually getting feedback from the audience, and the feedback I usually get, I mean, I was terrified at one point that I did a big piece in a show called Sweet Harmony, was about the rave scene, and it was 20 meters long and had 750 pictures in of my life. And I stood back and suddenly thought, oh no, it looks like a massive kind of wall all about me. But I kind of went with it and thought, I'll see what happens. And when the people came through and started looking at it, all the feedback I got was that it either some part reminded that person of themselves, or that it brought back memories of something. And so I realized that rather than a big wall of images of me, it acted as a big mirror, maybe into the souls of the audience, or, I'm interested in images that touch you in a certain way, kind of not sort of two-dimensional, but, that touch your heart or soul deeply.
So the exhibition is starting tonight, and it's running for the next few weeks in Bangkok. But in addition, there's a film about Castle Morton debuting as well tonight. I guess it's interesting that the kind of topic of the rave space is, I guess, one that people still touch back and are interested in kind of 2026. Are there any reflections that you've got looking back to the time when you kind of made the original shoot, some of the experiences, and I guess how probably the end, well, that was maybe one of the last times kind of real free party culture existed. And I suppose it feels like free party culture is kind of quite hard to come by in 2026. But maybe what are your, a few years later now, what are your reflections on maybe how culture in the world has changed, I suppose?
Yeah, ironically, as someone that works with an archive, I'm not that interested in nostalgia, to be honest, just for its own sake. But I think rather than, looking back 20 years, we could look back hundreds of years and even maybe thousands of years and see what it is that we as humans kind of need. And I found it out through my own ways, but I think we need connection. And I think dance floors that have existed in various different ways for thousands of years all over the world are very important spaces, places for humans to come together. At a rave, it would be for maybe 12 hours of dancing and looking into each other's faces and feeling that connection that builds over the time, over the night. There would have been ritual dances and dances throughout the ages. So I think that, maybe, a lot of our experiences these days are interrupted by screens, for example, which is an obvious thing. I think as humans we still seek the same things, and maybe we just have to look a little bit harder these days.
I guess. But I guess there's also the context around like legality and access and free spaces. It feels like are quite different in 2026. And I guess we're in a country where context and like legalization of access is also slightly different. But as someone who spent a long time in the UK, do you feel like I guess since the moment in the 90s and how culture has changed, that there has been a shift? I suppose people are looking for connection, but also I guess our context around maybe access to public space and access to I guess free or inverted commas music, I suppose, has slightly shifted and maybe moved to a more kind of commercial setting in a music festival or in other contexts, maybe online.
Yeah, that's a massive question. Oh, massive. You almost answered yourself in a lot of ways. I mean, back in the 90s, we had a police crackdown on the spaces we were using, and but I would say that, I mean, there are so many ways to look at that. Yes, I think that the commercialization of spaces is a problem. Although when big music festivals started, I thought, well, that was better than nothing, because all we seemed to have in the UK up until that point was sort of football matches, was the only time you could get together and scream and shout and drink a lot of beer. So that was good, but the music festivals are quite exclusive, they're expensive, and one of the things I always notice about them is that there aren't any dogs, and I love a dog when I'm a bit tired. I've been dancing quite a lot. So, but then I think, things are happening in smaller ways, like there are a lot of raves happening in the UK. They're just a bit cleverer than we were, so they're not doing massive illegal raves where thousands of people turn up, like in the film Free Party. They're doing kind of smaller raves, 100 people in some woods, little speakers, and they're having, a great time. I think culturally we need much more access to free or cheap spaces. I think Berlin is starting to recognize the fact that, clubbing and dancing and techno are important for culture. I hope they take a lead in making that happen in other places. But then also people like Shige from Super Raf, who answers an email from a random artist in England, and I say, should we do something? And he goes, yeah. And then I turn up in Bangkok, 2 weeks later, and he's made the most extraordinary exhibition, and he's got the most brilliant sound system and the biggest. He's kind of borrowed, I think, the biggest screen I've ever seen to show the film. So it's going to be like a really fun night. So actually also a massive shout out to anyone that puts in some energy and some effort to culture. You, for example.
Well, big shout to Shige over there. Yeah, no, I think that's they're very important, and I think also free access to kind of community driven projects are something that are important to the radio here. I guess maybe you could just talk about the dates and the details for the exhibition and the showing. Shige, could you come and just remind us, just for any listeners out there?
Okay. So we have photo exhibition. Vinca Peterson's No System from 14th of February till 11th of March. But tonight we have. Tonight and tomorrow night we have opening. It's actually not really exclusive, so if you're listening to this, you can join. It's from 6 p.m. And at the same time, we have a film screening of Free Party, a folk history by Aaron Trinder in Warehouse, Taratnoi from 8 p.m. tonight, the 12th, and tomorrow night on the 13th. Yeah, thank you. Come join.
Cool, thank you very much. All right, perfect. Vinca, is there any last comments or words you want to say?
If you ever make it as far as the Isle of Skye, come and say hello.
Nice, cool. Well, thank you very much. That's been Vinca Peterson, and do go check out their exhibition. And this will be up online as a podcast very shortly. Thank you very much.